The vote was already in progress when the activation signal went out. I know, because I was watching the board. They gave me a seat in the observer gallery, third tier, port side, separated from the 9 deliberative tiers by a glass partition and a polished rail of Kethavari greystone worn smooth by 6,000 years of hands resting on it.
Non-voting observer.
That was the designation on my credentials. Retired Earth Defense Liaison, Davin Oral, 61 years of service record and no authority whatsoever in this chamber. I had been sitting in that chair for 4 days while the convocation worked through its procedural agenda, and in 4 days not one of the 9 deliberative tiers had addressed a word to me directly. That was the point. I was there to be seen and to be silent. I was very good at being silent. The presiding Archon called the read-in protocol to the floor at 0743 local station time. I had been expecting it since 0600, when the secondary agenda was distributed and I read the motion's registration number on the 4th line. The Kethavari have a tradition of burying their most significant actions inside procedural language, as though the weight of the thing might break the session if named directly. The read-in protocol had a registration number and a 3-line summary that described it as a terminal remediation measure, planetary grade, class absolute. That was accurate enough. It was also the most careful way I had ever seen anyone describe the end of a world. The Archon was tall even by Kethavari standards, pale skin pulled tight over multiple cranial ridges, secondary fingers folded in the configuration they use for formal address, which sits somewhere between solemnity and threat depending on which tier it's directed at. He read the protocol's text into the record without inflection. I had read the same text 11 days ago, in a different room, and I had read it carefully. The mechanism had been placed in Earth's mantle 7 years prior, during the border survey period, when our diplomatic access was restricted and our deep seismic monitoring was a generation behind theirs. 73 read-in or deposits, each one keyed to a resonance frequency that, when triggered simultaneously, would initiate a chain reaction in the upper mantle. The planet would do the work itself. That was the elegance of it. From their perspective, the Kethavari Imperial Convocation would not technically be destroying Earth. Earth would destroy itself, and the formal record would show only that a class absolute remediation had been duly authorized. I had always found that distinction instructive. It told me a great deal about what the Kethavari valued more than anything else, and that was their archive. The first tier voted at 0751. 7 in favor, 2 abstentions. The second tier voted at 0753. 9 in favor. The vote count appeared on the holographic display along the curved eastern wall, rendered in pale amber Kethavari script. The chamber absorbed the tally without comment. There was no drama in a Kethavari convocation when a measure was going to pass. The drama belonged to the procedural maneuver, the registered objection, the precedent citation. The Kethavari had no tradition of last-minute reversals. Once a protocol reached the floor with the Archon sponsorship, the outcome was settled before the first tier opened its ledger. I rested my hands on the greystone rail and kept my face where they expected it, attentive, slightly solemn, the expression of a man watching a process he cannot influence. In my inner coat pocket was a document sleeve. It was sealed. It had been sealed since I boarded the transit shuttle at 2100 the previous evening, which was approximately 40 minutes after I received the signal I had been waiting for. The signal had been 7 words. It came through a standard maintenance channel that the Kethavari monitoring apparatus did not flag as significant, because no military transmission would ever be routed through a maintenance channel, and the Kethavari had very clear ideas about what military transmissions look like. The 7 words were, all 73 sites confirmed clear, 0417. That was the timestamp. 0417 station time. The deactivation teams had been in position for 11 days. Some of them had gone down in standard geological survey craft, which require no special clearance and generate no alerts, because a geological survey craft visiting planetary sites of seismic interest is not an event worth logging. The Kethavari deep scan arrays look for military hardware signatures. A survey drill does not have a military hardware signature. It turns out that a survey craft carrying 4 personnel and the right equipment can reach a read-in deposit, identify the resonance key architecture, neutralize the frequency lock, seal the cavity, and be back on the surface before the next scheduled atmospheric window. 73 times. The third tier voted at 0756. The fourth at 0800. I had done the arithmetic on the shuttle. By the time the convocation opened its session, every read-in deposit on Earth was inert. The mechanism the Kethavari had spent 4 years placing and 2 years calibrating and 7 years treating as their final word in any negotiation involving humanity had been, as of 0417 that morning, a collection of sealed rock cavities with no operational capacity whatsoever. The convocation was about to vote on whether to activate a weapon that no longer existed. They were, in the precise technical sense, voting on nothing. I had thought about telling them. I had sat with that question for most of the previous 4 days, watching them work through their procedural agenda, watching the secondary fingers of the tier representatives move through their formal configurations, the 3-part hold for procedural acknowledgement, the flat palm extension for recorded objection, the slow bilateral draw for unanimous assent. I knew those configurations. I had studied Kethavari hand language for 9 years. What I watched in that chamber, across those 4 days, was a body that had governed a sector of space for longer than my species had possessed written language, conducting its business with the unhurried confidence of something that had never been wrong about anything that mattered. They were wrong about this. The 5th tier voted at 0803. The 6th at 0807. By the 6th tier, the gallery had grown quieter in the way Kethavari chambers do when a significant measure approaches passage. Not a change in sound, exactly, but a change in how the air carries itself. A collective settling in among the 500 robed figures in the deliberative seating. The holographic displays showed the vote count building in pale amber columns. The fleet manifest was also displayed in the upper register. 7 Kethavari war-class vessels positioned at the outer boundary of Earth system, present not to intervene but to observe and record. The convocation wanted witnesses to the moment the protocol triggered. That was important to them. They documented everything. Their archive went back 11,000 years and they were proud of it in the way that only very old things can be proud of the records they have kept. The 7th tier voted at 0809. The 8th at 0812. The 9th tier, the senior deliberative tier, the one whose membership had not changed in 3 centuries because Kethavari of sufficient standing live very long lives when no one is at war with them, voted at 0817. 6 in favour, 1 abstention. The abstention was registered by a figure I could not see clearly from the gallery, seated at the far port end of the tier, whose secondary fingers held the flat palm extension for approximately 2 seconds before returning to rest. I noted it. The abstention did not affect the outcome. The presiding Archon announced the result at 0819. 81 votes in favour. No opposing votes. 4 abstentions, which under Kethavari procedural law are counted as silent assent when the measure carries unanimously in all other respects. The Reedon Protocol was enacted. He transmitted the activation sequence to the orbital relay at 0821. A signal bounced down through the communications tier's primary array to the resonance network embedded in Earth's upper mantle, which was designed to receive it, confirm receipt, and return an acknowledgement pulse, and then begin. Then he waited. Standard confirmation return time from the nearest Reedon site, 11 seconds. At 11 seconds, there was no return signal. The Archon's secondary fingers shifted configuration, not dramatically, a small repositioning, but I was watching them. He transmitted the activation sequence a second time. Standard protocol for interrupted signals. Resend on the same channel and wait. The relay confirmed transmission. The signal went out again. The 11-second window passed in silence. A technician in the communications tier moved to a secondary console. Another joined him. I watched the Archon's fingers hold their new configuration, what the Kethavari use when they are certain the thing they are waiting for will arrive, that it is only a matter of the signal clearing whatever interference has delayed it. It is a confident position. It is the configuration of an institution that has never waited for something and not received it. It did not receive it. The communications tier sent the signal a third time at 0824, this time on a direct frequency rather than the relay bounce, cutting out the intermediate node entirely. 3 seconds of transit time to the nearest site. The window passed. Then a fourth attempt, spread frequency across all 73 site coordinates simultaneously. The spread frequency attempt has a return window of 40 seconds because the signals are staggered by site distance. The 40-second window passed. 4 additional technicians had gathered at the communications console. The tier representatives had stopped moving. A senior member of the 9th tier leaned forward and spoke to the Archon in a voice too low to carry to the gallery. The Archon's secondary fingers moved into a configuration I did not have a name for. I had studied that language for 9 years and I could not place that configuration in any reference I had read. It was not in any formal register. It may have been something older. I stood up. I had not intended to make a production of it. I stood because the rail was at the right height and I needed to place the document sleeve where it would be seen. I set it on the grey stone rail, flat, centered, visible from the deliberative tiers below and the communications gallery above. Then I sat back down. One of the Archon's aides crossed the chamber floor and carried the sleeve up to the primary tier without being asked. The Archon opened it. Inside was one document, a deactivation confirmation report, filed through Earth's Geological Survey Authority, countersigned by 3 independent assessment teams operating under separate chains of command, timestamped and sealed by the survey's senior director at 0423 station time that morning. It listed all 73 sites. For each site, it listed the pre-deactivation status, active, resonance keyed, operational, and the post-deactivation status, inert, neutralized, sealed. It listed the teams, their equipment categories, the methods employed, the time on site, the confirmation readings. It was 41 pages and it was very thorough, because the people who wrote it knew it would be read by the kind of body that checks every figure against its own records, and they wanted every figure to be correct. The timestamp on the cover page was 0423. The read-in protocol had been enacted at 0819. The Archon read the cover page. He read the first 2 internal pages. He handed the document to the member on his left, who read the same pages and passed it to the next. It made its way along the senior tier in silence. The amber vote count columns were still displayed on the eastern wall, unchanged, recording a result that had been formally entered into the Kethavari Permanent Archive. That archive went back 11,000 years. It would record the enactment of the read-in protocol, and it would record the deactivation report, and it would record everything that came after, and the 2 timestamps would sit beside each other in the ledger for as long as the archive existed. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the document had not already said more clearly than I could have said it. At 0847, the fleet commander of the senior war-class vessel at Earth's outer boundary requested authorization for a visual confirmation pass over the first 3 read-in sites on the documents list. The Archon authorized it. The pass took until 0912. The visual confirmation matched the survey report. The fleet vessel then conducted a deep scan pass, which requires more time, and filed its independent assessment at 0931. All sites examined were non-operational. The resonance key architecture had been removed. The class absolute remediation measure enacted at 0819 had no functional target. The remaining 4 fleet vessels filed their own assessments by 0947. They matched. I waited. At 1004, the presiding Archon formally requested a recess. It was the first unscheduled recess the Convocation had called in 11 consecutive sessions. Under Kethavari procedural law, a recess following a class absolute vote requires a formal annotation entered into the session's permanent record. The reason for the recess, stated precisely, for the archive. I watched the annotation clerk in the lower tier open the session ledger and prepare to write. I do not know what he wrote. The ledger is sealed under the Convocation's deliberative privilege. It will be sealed for 200 years, at which point no one involved in that session will be alive to be embarrassed by it, and perhaps that is the point. What I know is what was true, and what the Archon knew was true, because the document on the primary tier stated it without decoration. There was nothing in Earth's mantle to activate. There had been nothing since 0417 that morning. 73 geological survey craft, 4 personnel each, 11 days in position. That is 292 people who descended to survey sites carrying the right equipment, did careful and precise work in complete silence, and then came back up and filed their reports through a maintenance channel in 7 words. Not one of them fired a weapon. Not one of them sent a formal communication to the Convocation or issued a declaration of any kind. They ran their surveys, sealed their sites, and went about the rest of their day. The 7 fleet vessels sat at the outer boundary and did not move. The chamber held its recess. I collected my credentials from the greystone rail and left the observer gallery through the port corridor, the same way I had entered it. My transit shuttle was where I had left it. I filed my liaison report when I reached the communications relay. 1 paragraph, factual, no editorial comment. I noted the time the protocol was enacted. I noted the time the activation signal first failed to return. I noted the time the recess was called. I noted that the 41-page deactivation report had been received and examined by the Convocation's primary tier. I did not note what I thought about any of it. A liaison report is not for that. What I thought about, on the transit back, was a survey team leader named Corin Veth, 28 years old, who had taken her craft down to Site 31 11 days ago. She had finished her work at 0311, ahead of schedule, and had filed her completion report at 0318, and then she had eaten whatever surveyors eat at 0318 in the morning and gone to sleep. She was asleep when the convocation cast its votes. She was asleep when the activation signal went out and returned nothing. She had done her work. The work was done. That was the whole of it. The Kethavari Imperial Convocation signed the extinction order at 0821. By 0417, there was nothing left to extinguish. They kept their record. We kept the planet. I have always thought that was a reasonable exchange.